Alrighty, since I want to make more review and analysis type content, but I rarely ever stumble across something that I really want to make like an hour long or so video essay on, I figured I'd just talk about some of the media that I've consumed recently, at least in terms of stuff that's in the public eye right now. Lately, I've been catching up on a lot of classics that I've never gotten around to before, but I really don't have much to add to whatever discussions have already taken place regarding those titles. Anyways, enough beating around the bush. As always, this content is for those who would find it interesting to hear a unique perspective on things that they perhaps wouldn't have come to on their own, or people who tend to have similar ways of thinking to myself. All my opinions are my own thoughts, all of which are subject to change in the future, and in no way should be taken as facts for myself and forcing my views onto others. It's kind of pointless at that point. Like, I realize that people on the internet are so insanely stupid that it doesn't matter how many times I say that. People literally just don't pay attention, so whatever. Let's get to it. By the way, I won't specifically go out of my way to spoil anything that happens in any particular series I talk about, but if I have a point that I need to make involving a spoiler, I really won't hesitate to discuss it. So if you're against getting spoiled for anything at all, you probably shouldn't be watching my content in general. Also, I'm really late with getting this script into video format, so some of the things that I talk about here were about a few episodes behind when I wrote this, as you'll probably notice. First things first, let's tackle the most talked about series of the hour, Invincible. I have never read anything from the source material for Invincible, and I have very little knowledge of it. I just watched the TV show after hearing people talk about the series. Easy answer out of the gate. It's a good show. It's worth the watch. Now we come into the more gritty details. I've been noticing a trend in recent years for people, when they want to recommend a series or hype something up, they start talking about everything the series does that is, like, groundbreaking, as though it's the first show to do anything that it does, or, like, a show can't just be good because it's really good. It has to be some, like, genre redefining masterpiece, even if it's remotely just watchable. Also, I only recently picked up on this habit, but I've been noticing a lot of reviewers tend to sing the praises of something they like by comparing it to a sort of straw man fallacy of other content rather than comparing it to established high quality content. Here, let me give you a quick example.
Really, the most impressive thing about Invincible, besides its writing and its narrative, is its animation. Its animation is absolutely incredible. There is obvious CGI at points, and sometimes it is a bit janky a little towards the end, but that's only for like some background stuff. That's not a big deal. But when it comes to a fight, it's beautiful. It is so fluid. In anime, and I don't mean to be blasphemous and call out anime here, but in anime, if you watch a fight scene in some of the big ones, the fight scene will consist of like maybe two attacks. Like, I'm using this spell. Yeah! Oh, I got hit by this spell. And now we'll talk for a couple minutes before the next attack is thrown. And like an entire anime fight scene can be broken down into like maybe 4 attacks being thrown in total across the entire fight. In Invincible, you get like fucking 5 minutes of straight fighting where it doesn't stop. Omni-Man's fighting something and he's fighting that shit for minutes constantly, and it's so fluid. It's probably not what you're used to seeing because it never stops to like just break down a narrative. They're not like fighting and he'll like throw a punch, the guy reacts to the punch, he's like, oh, I can't believe you've done this. Well, I had to do this because of this. He'll throw the punch and then immediately follow it up. Omni-Man will hit someone against the ground, they'll bounce off the ground, and while they're flying up in the air off the momentum from hitting the ground, he'll grab their leg, fucking slam them on the ground again, then he'll fly up even higher, and then he'll chase him up like this.
Think about how weird this is as praise, right? Okay? As if this is somehow the only animated TV series with 2 punches in a row, or any fluidity or combat or extended sequences beyond just individual actions. Not to mention that, this show does have a lot of bad animation. And really obnoxious, drawn out fights with very few actions taken. Not that having few actions is inherently a bad thing, but the point is that there are shows that are, as he describes, that are bad, that exist. But, like, what's the point in bringing those up? Is the argument for why Invincible is a good show supposed to be, oh, it's better than shows that are fucking garbage? Wow, what glowing praise. It meets the bare minimum expectation for action. If I consume a new series, like a drama or an action series or anything like that, and I think it's pretty good, I would express that by comparing it to other series that are also really good. I wouldn't compare it to the bottom of the barrel, lowest common denominator of media content. Framing everything this way just makes me want to roll my eyes whenever I hear anyone talk about how a new good show or movie is, because they feel the need to frame it in this epic manner, as if everything else you could watch is worthless trash, everything else that's made is just like complete garbage, and this new show is paving the way to a brighter future. Guys, Invincible is pretty good. There are plenty of other series that are pretty good in similar ways. Everything in the show is something you've probably seen before. Its quality is also far from groundbreaking. It's just a good show. We can enjoy good shows. There's nothing wrong with just liking good shows without, like, worshipping them and insisting that they have to be the first to do anything what they did to be worth consuming. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I've watched around like 20 different TV series and movies in the past 2 weeks alone, and Invincible was one of the most enjoyable moment to moment, if in a fairly juvenile way. Let me break down my impression of its appeals. I'd say that Invincible is a young adult-oriented, edgelordy kind of superhero series that attempts to mix a sort of parody-esque comedy and casual treatment of superhero tropes, with some more serious but still kind of expectable superhero conflicts. It's a very violent series, and the violence is definitely an edgy aesthetic. The story as a whole is not actually any more mature, strictly speaking, than countless other superhero stories. Some of the characters and their relationships are engaging, mainly with Mark and his family, but like the drama as a whole is still pretty juvenile, which is fine. I'm just saying that it's not exactly, Taxi Driver levels of character depth and a fascinating look into the interpersonal relationships and human conditions. It's a pretty straightforward drama that any teenager could easily consume. The darker aspects of the story are clearly for the sake of being dark and edgy to appeal to edgelord kids and teenagers. It's not actually any more mature of a story than most mainstream superhero stuff. Some people try to make it out that the show is really gritty and mature and realistic, and that the violence is all for the sake of realism, but it very clearly isn't. The violence is for the sake of being edgy, and that's fine. That's the type of show that it wants to be. On the whole, I think the show really fluctuates in terms of quality. Episode 5, in my opinion, is probably the best single episode of the show, and it's the one that works the best as a standalone episode. Episode 8 has some of the best content in the show, but that's only for like the first 20 minutes, and then the rest of the episode is more or less a boring nothingburg. There's a lot in this show that I feel, at least with what we have of the story so far, could have been cut entirely. In fact, you could probably cut almost everything between episodes 1 and episode 7 easily. I mean, what is the story? Huh? Like, what is the overarching plot? Nolan kills the Justice League. People find out what he did while literally nothing else happens on that front. Nolan fights Mark. Credits. End of the show. Or end of the season. Watching it the first time through, I spent a lot of my time thinking, what is the plot? Like, there's no conflict that is currently happening. There's nothing on the horizon that we know Mark has to specifically prepare for. There's no necessary, like, the only conflict that seems even remotely important is with Nolan killing the Guardians, but that plotline won't progress until Nolan just does something else to reveal what the fucking point of everything is. Or, they find him out and confront him. The plot feels very aimless a lot of the time because there's not really anything that these characters are looking towards in the near future as far as they know or as far as we, the audience, know. Some of this content is way more boring than other parts of it. The Mars mission episode had me falling asleep. I had no reason to be invested in the conflict. Nothing interesting happened, and it was not fun to watch. Mark's relationship with Amber plays out like literally every superhero dating a regular person storyline you've ever seen in your entire life. Seriously, with literally no change at all. It's just the same fucking story, copy and pasted. Everything with Robot and the clones was, like, fine, but again, I still have no reason to give a shit about any of that, and it's just taking time away from the more engaging story of Mark growing as a hero and Nolan being the eugenicist colonizer that he is. I think the biggest knocks I have against the series are just the really boring episodes, or at any time that they're dealing with some minor conflict that isn't interesting, like fighting the earthquake guy, the Mars mission, the mutants on the campus, and so on. The machine head conflict only works because they actually write it in such a way that you give a fuck about the outcome of the conflict, and because some baller shit happens. There's a lot of really uninteresting plot lines that you follow in this show. And like I said, it's insane how little most of this stuff actually impacts anything that I guess you would call the main story. Like, even fucking Eve doesn't impact the main story with Mark's family and Cecil. Mark's friend William not only is like a ride or die G, he actually speaks to Nolan when Nolan tries to intimidate him into telling him where Mark is, thus bringing the elements of the story together. He had more impact on the narrative than Eve did. Everything on the New Guardians team doesn't matter. Amber doesn't matter. Eve doesn't matter. The plot did not need them up to this point, as far as we can tell. Even understanding that they might matter in the future, it's still no excuse for us to spend our time following characters that, as far as we know, don't matter and aren't very interesting to follow. But beyond that, another big issue I have with this series is the awful world building. Someone might lie to you and tell you that this story is taking the tropes of superhero media and putting them in a more realistic context, a reconstruction, if you will. But the problem is that a lot of the world building is sort of hand-waved away using comedy, and then when they decide to make it more serious, they just ignore all the stuff that they already defined through the comedy. Let me give you an example of this. Most of the first episode consists of superhero parody. It's obvious that this was meant to be a bootleg knockoff of DC superheroes, and you have comedic elements making fun of their powers, like when bootleg Flash carries a bunch of people to safety and they start throwing up from moving so fast. Even though if you say wanted to be realistic about it, if they accelerated and decelerated that quickly, they would literally fucking die. Okay, but throughout the whole season, you get the sense that the Earth is so chock full of superheroes and superhero-esque stories that the planet's safety is being threatened on pretty much a daily basis or more. Debbie even says that Nolan fighting aliens in another dimension is just Tuesday for him. They make these kinds of jokes all the time. Clearly tongue-in-cheek, making fun of the constant serious threats to Earth's safety in superhero media. My problem with this is that the story just becomes the very thing that it's making fun of without giving any reason as to why this conflict should be taken more seriously, but those other conflicts were just a joke. Tuesday shit. Take, for example, the Flaxans in episode 2. They live in an entirely different dimension to Earth, and presumably Viltrum. I'm assuming Viltrum is in the same dimension as Earth, is a planet that exists, you know? It's not like Viltrum is from a magic realm like Asgard or something, right? And Flaxans come from a dimension in which time moves faster. So like 3 days in our time is the same as decades passing in their time. This on its own is a world-shattering, time-bending ability. This by itself is a massive threat. Even if it's not the Flaxans specifically, couldn't, say, Cecil or any of the Viltrumites, if they have such advanced technology, couldn't they send in some of their own people, some colonies of engineers and scientists and whoever else would live in the Flaxan dimension and take advantage of the fact that they can get decades of work and productivity done in what would just be a few days for them in their home reality? In episode 8, Nolan tells Mark that they could provide Earth with technology centuries beyond what they currently have. But, like, to my understanding, they could have already done that themselves by taking advantage of the Flaxan portal and capitalizing on their time-bending dimension, right? Nolan tells Mark that he'll outlive everyone he loves who's a human, but again, same shit. A human could live on Earth, and he could live in the Flaxan world, and they'd probably age closer to the same relative to each other. My problem with this is that they already shot their own world building in the foot by using something so reality-shattering and then just hand-waving it away as like a casual fucking joke. But then, unlike something like Steins Gate or Danganronpa that uses the casual joke and then turns it into something that can be taken seriously, they use the casual comedy in place of real world building. And then when it's time for us to take the story seriously, they just use regular lore, rather than actually writing in something that incorporates all of the wacky, dumb shit they've already made using the comedy. For you to take the Viltrum threat seriously, you have to ignore the reality of the flaxen time-bending dimension, or the existence of actual magic and demons and all of this shit. You have to ignore everything. Someone wrote time travel on a note at one point in the show, so that's not proving that time travel exists in this universe, but it's a pretty good indication that it might exist, which would render the entire plot meaningless if someone could just time travel and undo what Nolan has already done. I mean, what do other people even... Why? Why do other people even have powers and abilities? Think about that. Think about how lazy the world building is in this way, because they use comedy and parody as an excuse for why everyone has superpowers. Like, oh, haha, it's a superhero thing, so they all just have superpowers, ha ha ha. But then when it turns serious, they still don't go back and explain why any of these things happened, or why anyone other than Mark and Nolan have powers. Using parody as an excuse to not actually build their own world and creating a shitload of plot holes and contradictions in the plot process. I mean, shit, look at how Eve's powers actually worked. According to her, she can manipulate matter at will. She makes trees grow out of nothing in like 2 seconds, all sorts of plants, complex building structures using different materials. She can literally just freely manipulate all physical matter. That's fucking broken. She could just snap her fingers and have Nolan's head explode or slide off his body if she wanted to. She could make his organs turn into lime jello if she wanted to. But it's only going to be used as a lazy cop-out explanation for how she does her pink laser blast shit, rather than taking a minute to stop and realize what she logically should be capable of doing. But yeah, that's my biggest issue with the series. I kept thinking, with the absolutely insane shit that I've seen them casually throw aside, I do not believe for a millisecond that you are this poorly equipped to deal with this bullshit. I mean, why do they even have, like, goofy superhero party thing? You know, like, why wouldn't they have a more logical and coherent system where the government incorporates superhero technology and resources into a structured military in a way that would actually make some sense? Why? Well, because it's a parody of superhero media. In superhero media, they have just superheroes. However, so that's how it works in this universe, regardless of if it makes sense in this universe or not. However, the point of parody or reconstruction is that you have to take the elements that are tropish and force them into a more realistic setting. You have to make the dumb shit make sense. That is how reconstruction works. This show has no intention of making its setting elements actually make sense or seem like this is how they would be. You have to make your actual story something more interesting than what you're making fun of or reconstructing. And in this story, the end result is that Nolan is just a racist alien enlisted to take over the planet, basically almost no different than a million other evil aliens that try to take over the planet for the same egocentristic reason, because they can. The only difference, really, and it's only relevant to the story, is because Nolan leaves because of my family, Vin Diesel shit. Oh, and I think all the jokes in this show are on the nose and boring and shitty. That goes for actually a whole bunch of the dialogue, especially in the first couple episodes. The dialogue gets better near the end, but it can be pretty cringy at times. Look. It's a good show, okay? But it fluctuates in quality, and it has its problems. I enjoyed it, except for all the parts where I was bored or annoyed. Some people have at least started to notice this a little bit with saying that, like, the Amber shit is really badly written and stuff like that. But yeah, that's Invincible. It's pretty good. I recommend it. Go watch it. It won't change your life, but it's a pretty fun show. We can accept that. Okay. Up next, before I lose the attention of any more of you salty kids, I want to talk about the best thing that I've watched in months and what is rapidly becoming one of my favorite TV shows, Odd Taxi. At the time of this writing, Odd Taxi is still chugging along, so it's more or less a review, less of a review than my thoughts on Invincible, which will be the case for all the current seasonal anime that obviously haven't finished yet. So Odd Taxi is really solid in my opinion. It's very much what appeals to my personal taste, and everyone that I've forced at gunpoint to watch it has been beyond impressed and shocked with how appealing it is to watch. Like many people would probably say, the main appeal of Odd Taxi, at least to me, is the presentation. The dialogue, the pacing of shots and information, just the whole tone is gripping. The characters are gripping because of how natural and believably they act. The dialogue is strictly believable at all times, it really pulls you in. The scenarios are very interesting and fresh, and has a lot of really great comprehension of modern human issues and societal issues without necessarily being a PSA on it or making something some overdramatic front and center conflict. The conflicts are all interesting and unique as a result of how mundane they are. Like, if you were gripped by, say, Yoshikage Kira's motivation in JoJo to live a quiet life, deal with his OCD and his social anxiety, and be left alone with no one's attention on him, and you are drawn into this conflict because of that unique mundanity, this is, in my opinion, very similar to that. It's not overbearing with any particular tone. It can be silly, it can be violent, intense. It's a very broad show, which again is part of the appeal of that presentation. You don't know where it's going or what the point of it is per se, but it's building up these interesting ideas that you can follow the whole way through. Maybe that's not the right way of putting it. You know enough about the conflicts that you have an expectation of what will come next, but you don't know when. You aren't lost waiting for some grounding to be built because you aren't given any promises of what will come in the eventual future, but the show does enough to add in unexpected elements into the narrative and into its own pacing that it feels fresh all the time and exciting in that way. Like, you can watch 2 episodes in a row that build upon the same conflict, but again, your expectation that the next episode will also follow or conclude that same conflict in the manner in which you expect. You get a completely standalone episode instead, following a completely different story that vaguely loops back around into granting implications for how it will affect the other story you've already been following, for example. Like, the point is, it just has really good production and understanding of how to write a compelling episodic story. It's not a brain-dead normie show that has a lot of flashing lights and screaming anime characters like a lot of anime that tend to be the most popular, but it's actually good, and that has to count for something even in the minds of people with shit taste. It's so good. It's so good. It's just, watching it is so good. It's such a good use of your time. And as a lot of people have said, it's honestly feels very Tarantino-esque. That's what it reminds me of the most. The story could amount to a fat load of fuck all nothing, and it wouldn't take away from how good and engaging the show has been up to this point. Odd Taxi. How dare you not be watching Odd Taxi? This is apparently the very first show the director and character designer that works on this has worked on, according to the internet. So props to that fucking guy. I can't wait to see what else he does in his career. As for the other seasonal anime that I've been keeping up with, at least, Hige wa Soru is fairly enjoyable so far, but it's half and half between stuff that I actually like watching and stuff that feels like a broken record or just not fun. Just going through the exact same motions or focusing or repeating conflicts I have no interest in. Like, it's a show, okay, to give you like context for those who probably aren't watching it, it's a show about a girl who ran away from home as to escape some vague, unknown, bad living situation, but then you're also, like, I'm expected to give half a flying fuck about, like, some office coworker's romantic interest in the main character. Like, be gone, thoughts. They're literally just distracting from the much more significant and important plot, and, like, come across as really self-important in that sense. So they're all, half the characters are extremely annoying and hateable, and the other half are likable. So it's up in the air for me whether the show will become more genuinely wholesome or endearing, or if it'll be bogged down by these weird, forced conflicts and an endless stream of people repeating themselves ad nauseum. I honestly don't have enough material to say one way or the other, since it's only like 5 episodes in right now, and like most anime, it doesn't really get to the fucking point very well. It's just that, like, Odd Taxi is so dense with high-quality content that it feels like 2 complete seasons have already been finished of any other anime in terms of how much shit has happened and gotten out of it when it's only been 5 episodes so far, which retroactively, like, makes all the other animes that I'm watching this season feel slow and shitty by comparison. The Nagatoro anime is also reaching the point where I'm worried that it's just going to feel more and more repetitive and boring as time goes on if it doesn't fundamentally advance in a meaningful way soon. I get that it's basically, like, I've heard good things about it from people that have read the entire series or wherever it is up to this point, but I was entertained by it at first, but it's kind of losing me now by this point. Everything else in the current season that I've watched is either a check it out later kind of thing, if it gets recommended by people that I trust the opinions of, or just the general masses, or just seems like really boring. And speaking of really boring, let's talk about the current season of Boku no Hero Academia. Rather, let's use the current season as an excuse for me to talk about the series as a whole, which I've been meaning to do for a while. You know that fantastic, superb masterpiece of an episode of television that was Free Churro from BoJack Horseman Season 5? The part where BoJack talks about the TV show Becker and how he had an unnatural fixation with the show, that he was disappointed when it was canceled, not because he liked the show, but because he felt that it could be so much more and it had the right elements but couldn't put them together. And now it never would be because of its cancellation. I probably wouldn't use those exact same words, but that's more or less how I tend to feel about My Hero Academia. On the whole, it's just pretty lackluster, decent at times shonen series, but due to just having seen a fair amount of it, or just the result of liking certain surface level ideas presented in the material, I have weirdly mixed feelings about the series as a whole. Like, I want to like it, but realistically speaking, it's just not that good. One of the things I find most strange about Hiroaka is, and by the way, I'm not caught up on the manga. I've read past what the current season is going to cover, but that's pretty much it. Just a little bit past that. I was pretty bored, so I stopped reading. But one of the things that I find most strange is just the overall message of the series. The setting especially seems very inconsistent, because it seems like the show is trying to say that the system and society and everything it has established works, especially the school. For example, like everything about UA is presented as though they're literal gods, that they can do no wrong, that everything they do is the most optimal and intelligent way of going about training righteous superheroes. But then, just for like plot convenience or other weird moments, there's just parts where UA suddenly isn't the greatest and wisest school that's ever existed. Like, when they break down how Shinso in Season 2 is a talented student, but he couldn't compete in the entrance exam with the robots because his superpower doesn't happen to be attuned to beating up, like, metal robots. Which seems like a pretty big oversight by the school, no? So that seems like a criticism of the way they run things, but the rest of the time it's all like, oh, UA knows what's best, UA this, UA that, everything good that's ever happened to mankind in all of fucking time is because of UA. It can't make up its mind if it thinks that the system is perfect and all-knowing, or if it's flawed and needs improving. And that's not just the school, but like the societal structure, all sorts of shit. There are a bunch of villains in the series that were genuinely slighted by the system of their society, and superheroes that are more or less just a commodity in the world. Like, the public treats them like celebrities for hire. The system seems like it's being criticized, right? Like, because of how heroes are worshipped, just like in The Boy. The setting is literally just The Boys, but lacking the self-awareness to see it as a criticism. It directly, like, motivated Endeavor to be evil, to abuse the system, to do wrong, to try to get ahead through the rules of the system. But the series is just way too saccharine to actually commit to these types of criticisms. What happens if the strongest hero in the world is an asshole? What happens if, like, the military can't stop the strongest hero or anything, if he goes rogue or anything? Well, we won't get to find out, because Endeavor is now just an upstanding guy. Like, what's a little domestic abuse? He's a good guy. Don't let anyone tell you differently. This is a series where the main character can just decide to do a quote-unquote 1,000,000% punch whenever the script feels like letting him do it, and the only consequence is just a vague, meaningless threat from a doctor that says that eventually it might hurt his arm to keep doing that. This is a series where the powers of friendship can just keep on winning, where there's just a magical force in the world that makes it so the UA students, regardless of their actual talents or established skills or anything, will just always win in all circumstances because, oh, UA is just so fucking galaxy brain. Their students are the best. They selected the best students ever. And it's just like power of friendship without there actually being friends. It's like the power of elitism. There's also always been issues with the core plot of how it relates to its cast. Like, okay, the way I see it, a good shonen series can either do things like One Piece or like Hunter x Hunter. In One Piece, and many other shonen series, this is the most frequent way of doing it, there's like a big conflict, and then all of our heroes have something to do in the conflict, usually. Zoro fights this guy, Usopp and Chopper fight that guy, Nami fights this other guy. They all have like a sort of one-to-one role to play. They all contribute to something that has a meaningful impact on the success or failure of a given conflict, and they're always relevant in all conflicts. except in like recent times, but even then it's like, oh, the group is split between this location, and they're both doing something related to whichever conflict that they are a part of. It's not like one character is just doing fuck all nothing for gigantic stretches of time. But they all have a cutout of their own personal contribution to the overall conflict at hand. They all matter. Or you can do things the Hunter x Hunter way, where rather than each character being given a specific task that they can personally struggle to carry out, like their own little mini fight, their mini story in the larger story. Instead, each character just naturally impacts the course of the story in a grounded, logical manner. Even the weakest character in Hunter x Hunter can impact how the story happens to play out because the writing makes a point of being very situational and logical. So as a result, every character matters in Hunter x Hunter, not just in a big climactic fight kind of way. A character doesn't have to be able to do a one-on-one fight and win to actually have a meaningful impact on any given conflict in Hunter x Hunter. So, the Boku no Hero cast is much more similar to something like, say, Fairy Tail, where there are a couple of actually important characters that will keep being important in the conflicts, and then you have the sideline characters that it's almost impossible to give a fuck about, because at best, they'll be taken off the bench for one goddamn episode to do something, have their little fucking stupid hero moment, and then go back to not being relevant to the plot. When it's done like that, even the times that these characters are taken off the bench feel hollow and forced and worthless, because it's obvious that they don't reflect this character actually being important to the story past this point. Like, when the fucking laser guy, I forget the name of that stupid idiot, shoots his laser into the air during that one exam where they're trying to get the provisional licenses, and the story tries way too hard to make it seem like this is a big important thing and you should give a fuck about this laser guy because of that one action. The way the story is written, there's no promise that any character other than Deku is going to be part of the story moving forwards. I mean, fuck, when was the last time that Ida mattered to the story? Season 2? The conflicts are all resolved by big clashes between heroes and villains, usually one good guy beating up the bad guy, like a lot of shonen series, where everything is determined by the protagonist and no one else. As a result, it can be really frustrating to watch them pretend like other characters matter all the time by doing these little side stories where some side fucker has his 2 minutes of fame. I've seen one or two of the Boku no the Hiroaka movies, and whichever movie is the one, I forget the names of all of them, but where Bakugo gets Deku's power at the end and they fight the Zero guy or whatever his name was, at least that movie I saw fixes this problem, because the whole thing is actually written so that all of the characters have a role to play in the story. I just thought I should mention that. The movie is still like fan fiction nonsense, and I saw it in theaters on a whim without realizing it played the dub, so I had to suffer through that misfortune, but still, my point remains. Now, there was a thought that I had barely keeping my eyes open as I skimmed through the episodes of this current Season 5, and I realized that some things have changed over time, and I find those changes to be interesting to consider. In terms of entertainment value, I think this is the worst content I've consumed from the series since the beginning. I've never been more bored and disinterested in what is happening than right now watching the current episodes, which is also the first season I've seen since reading ahead. I was reminded of that old Gigak video, you know, where he talks about how the fights in Hiroaka are boring and simplistic and usually involve, like, a single gigantic clash. And it made me realize that the current, like, Class A versus Class B fights aren't actually like that. They're more complex. All the characters actually, like, do things, some of which aren't really explained. Like, for example, the Invisible Girl somehow reflects light. Even though she's just invisible, she has no ability to become less transparent or, like, reflect light or anything. So I don't understand how that power works, but whatever. Regardless, the fights are kind of complex. They implement strategies that aren't just, like, clashes of simplistic brute force. And it got me thinking, why is this worse than before if they're actually trying to shore up what I guess some would consider to be a narrative weakness, a writing weakness? One problem is that it doesn't show the characters ever considering their options and discussing what they might want to try. It just shows something going down. Like, the way that they decide to frame it is a problem. It cuts to a scene where they tell you that what happened was the plan all along. Not exactly a great way to make the audience believe that the characters are actually smart or able to predict things with great accuracy and come up with effective plans. It also runs into the other contradiction when you see, like, that whoever we're following usually doesn't come up with any plans. Like, for example, Momo's team went into their fight not having discussed a goddamn thing, seemingly, other than, oh yeah, you use Dark Shadow, bro. That is the word, it's where it's at. And that's it. Yet the opposing team had a fucking contingency plans and doomsday protocols where they had plans upon plans upon plans, apparently, as far as we're made to believe. Why did they actually think about what would happen while our team that we're following didn't even try to predict anything? Why? Well, because the writing is doing whatever it can to avoid actually showing a character sitting down and thinking up a logical strategy like a human would, mulling through dozens of potential options and expectations and risk-reward management or anything like that. No. It has to present everything as like a big dumb twist moment where the character just magically fucking says, oh, you've activated my trap card. I saw this coming all along. Like a chode. It's stupid. I can easily just say that the episodes are flat out unproductive. Barely anything gets done or discussed in each episode. They spend way too much time on each individual fight, even with the added complexity. They aren't complex enough to warrant this much of a time sink in each fight. And there's just nothing interesting that happens. The most interesting shit on screen is the actual combat strategies at play, but those are constantly being interrupted by, like, bad, cringy dialogue. You know, like how if you want the audience to believe something, you have to show them rather than tell them. Like, one of my favorite quotes says, fiction is all about acting truthfully under imaginary circumstances. I have to believe something I'm seeing under the imaginary circumstances being presented in order for me to take it seriously. But this shit, no way. They spend so much time just telling you how fucking cool and smart these characters are. They won't just let things happen and allow you to come to your own conclusions about how much you like the characters or how much you're impressed with their abilities or their strategies. They have to spend minute after minute telling you that this character's plan is so fucking smart and he's so talented at everything. It's just so ingenious, so next level. See, the thing about believing the narrative is that if a character suddenly does something that they've never done before, I'm not going to believe it. Imagine, like, any typical Mary Sue writing like this. Like, oh, the character perfectly calculated exactly what they should do. They planned it in advance because they're just so goddamn smart. And will also tell you how goddamn smart they are for the rest of the entire episode. The series used to have non-Mary Sues. It used to have conflicts that revolved around not everyone necessarily being a literal perfect human being. Like, Bakugo used to be at least perceived in the narrative as some antagonistic force in some way. But now it's just universally accepted in the narrative that he's a flawless, perfect good guy who just yells a lot, and that's his personality. Todoroki used to be a point in the narrative of contention because of his internal weaknesses and shortcomings. Ida too. But that doesn't exist anymore. There's no tension. It's all just fan service vehicles that because the characters are just, like, they're just fan service. Like, they're so popular, the creator isn't willing to criticize these characters anymore. I never wanted to punch Deku in the face more than watching these Season 5 episodes. I've never been particularly annoyed by Deku before, like I've heard other people talk about, but literally every time he pops his fucking stupid face on the screen this season, I know he's just about to force down my throat how impressed I should be with some fucking character because the writers chose to make that character do some galaxy brain shit and tell me how much I should like them and think that they're cool. Hiroaka has always had this problem of just telling you how much you should praise a character rather than just having a believable character interaction and organically allowing the audience to appreciate the thought or effort that they can believe a character has put into something. But it's way worse now than it's ever been before. It also becomes way more unbearable now because it's literally every character. I'm not joking. Every UA student has a fucking book report written by the rest of the cast on how amazing they are, how fucking awestruck we should feel to witness their splendor. See, here's the thing. I don't believe that. I do not believe that every single UA student is this amazing, perfect hero with unstoppable talent bursting at the seams that's, like, will always rise above every occasion. Why? Well, again, it feeds into the stupid mythos that just being associated with UA, or that the fact that UA accepted you into their school, means that you're the most talented children to ever live. Not only is it just boring as all fuck for every UA student to be a flawless Mary Sue who has no weaknesses to overcome and who is always talented and dedicated enough to overcome literally any situation they find themselves in, I don't believe that UA as a university is so next level that their schooling process is just guaranteed to produce all of these insanely godlike beings. And the background early on is that, like, say, Aizawa is the sort of teacher that canonically expelled an entire class of students the previous year, which means that just because they got into UA doesn't mean that they're automatically god tier, right? So that's another contradiction. Like, you're telling me that last year there were a bunch of UA students that weren't perfect Mary Sues, but you're just randomly that literally every single member of UA this year between both Class A and Class B, every single one of them is some sort of, like, born winner destined to overcome all odds? Like, fuck off. That's so contrived and boring. But beyond that, almost nothing happens in each episode as they waste so much of your time with just, like, really boring, like, mini flashbacks to tell you the generic-ass reason why this character doesn't actually matter and is strong now or has some new ability to flaunt and then go back to being irrelevant to the story. Just, like, nothing fucking interesting happens at all, and 80% of it is just characters sucking each other's assholes and complimenting each other on how cool they are. Like, the writer is literally just congratulating himself on how badass his own characters are. It's gross. It's gross to watch. And then, of course, the characters come off with the tired as fuck, oh, but I still have, so much work I need to do. Oh, woe is me, I'm so fucking humble, because, yeah, I can't even... Annoying garbage. And that takes up another couple minutes of each episode where they all like, oh, but I'm the most humble person ever as well. That, like, shit, just show me a decent content and I'll shut the fuck up. There's genuinely like a 40-second recap flashback in the middle of one of these episodes. 40 seconds to the dot. Not an exaggeration, I timed it. Just playing straight footage from previous seasons with no editing or splicing or anything. 40 seconds straight. There's maybe like 3 minutes of fighting in each episode, 18 minutes of wasting my time with cringy, saccharine trash. And the problem is, any strategy, quote-unquote, that is employed in these episodes doesn't matter because there's no grounding or sense of limitations. This is a series where people can literally just tell you, hey, I actually just have a brand new ability I've never told you about, and you have to deal with it. You just have to deal with it. You have no basis for where anyone is relative to each other in combat, locationally, or anything, what anyone can and cannot do in any given situation. For example, like, okay, the most recent fight at the time of me writing this, you have the guy that can, like, disappear into shadows, right? And it's initially, like, a big problem for them because they can't fucking hit him. So they try to use light to, I guess, force him out of the shadows because that makes them shadows, like, too small or unpredictable. I mean, it's not like they can eliminate all shadows from the area, so he would still have some shadows to hide in, but I guess it makes it more difficult for him to do so. But anyways, it's not entirely clear, but anyways, it's not entirely clear exactly if that would force him to reveal himself or not, but the point is they used light against the shadow guy so that they can actually hit him. Fine. That's whatever, that's fine, But then later in the fight, after he already escaped, and they're dying to the fucking mushrooms, and they can't do anything, the bird guy gets the thermal goggles, and somehow that lets him find the targets, even though he'd still have to, navigate the complex pipes and shit to be able to get them in eyesight. It's not like the thermal goggles would let him see through walls all over the place just to identify their positions. But anyways, like, just having thermal goggles wouldn't let them know exactly where they are in this entire gigantic environment. There's no reason for them not to have started with the thermal goggles unless they're stupid idiots, which I guess they are. But the point is, he gets the ability to find the Mushroom Girl and the Shadow Boy, and how does he deal with the Shadow Guy's ability to slip into shadows now that they don't have access to a light source that will destroy the shadows? Well, he just approaches him directly, straightforwardly, and just hits him in a straightforward manner, and this just works for some reason. For some reason, he just goes beeline straight for the Shadow Guy and just punches him, and he doesn't, escape into shadows or dodge. He doesn't come up with a way to counter his shadow ability. The established ability of the Shadow Guy, he's hard to catch, and he's instantly beaten by the bird guy's stand. He instantly beats the bird guy's stand by taking control of it, but the bird guy just now uses his stand to attack the Shadow Guy, and it works this time. He saw the Birdman coming. There's no reason that he couldn't have, dipped into the shadows and escaped or tried to take control of the stand again, but no. He just loses instantly. No light source, no nothing, no countering his ability. They just decide that he just loses. in a millisecond now. Why? Fuck me, I don't know. And then he gets captured by a blanket because I guess that's how that works, even though that makes no sense. Like, shouldn't he be able to leave the shadows? Like, if he's caught in a whatever. How can he be captured by that? But anyways, thinking about it will only hurt my brain. I mean, for instance, just like I talked about with, like, Adam Eve in the Invincible section, Momo should be a god-tier broken character in this universe based on her ability to make literally fucking anything, only limited by its mass. Not and I guess complexities. Like, she can theoretically produce any substance, any particle, any known element to humanity. If the story actually tried to explore what she could logically do with that ability, the whole story would probably break down under how unstoppable that ability is. So it has to kind of take it not that seriously or not think that hard about it. But the point is, there isn't a sense of limitations to these fights, which makes the strategy elements feel hollow. Like, at any moment they could just fucking say as a throwaway excuse for what happened or why. Like, oh, all of a sudden this character didn't do something they probably could have done, and they just lost for no reason. Problems that are difficult to overcome just stop existing when it's not convenient to the plot for the characters to have to find logical solutions to these problems. I appreciate the attempt to put elements of strategy in the series, but you need to at least put enough thought into it so it seems like it fits the narrative and setting and isn't creating a bunch of contradictions. Like I said, it seems extremely weird that some of these characters just flat out don't come up with plans ahead of time for these matches. If you actually really think hard about the decisions that these characters make relative to what we know their abilities to be, you start running into a lot of these situations where you're like, well, why didn't you just do this thing here that we know you can do? The problem with the strategy is that it's written purely for the sake of giving little hero moments to each character. Like, oh, how are they going to get out of this one? Oh, suddenly and surprisingly, this kid comes out and does some cool shit, I guess, and saves the day. For a strategy to feel real, like a character actually thought about what they would do strategically, you have to think about it the way the character would, from the ground up, what information they have and how they would use that. Writing these little gotcha moments where something is revealed to have a big dumb plan ahead of time just comes across as hollow and always leads to plot holes in the logic of the strategies the characters take. And just flat out, like, nothing is happening. Nothing will be happening this season. The only thing that's going to come next is just Deku's bullshit latent abilities garbage, so pretty much nothing worth watching. It feels like the show has become a parody of itself. Like, all the content purely exists just to create fan service and fan fiction for its own characters. It's like watching a montage of fan fictions. It sucks. There's not even stakes to this conflict, physical or emotional stakes. The only appeal could be watching cool fights, but they waste so much time that you can't even do that. The fights only even have elements of pretend strategy that they have as an excuse to have diegetic narration about how fucking cool the characters are. And that is the definition of fan service. It exists so that people who want someone else to tell them, bro, I also love the fucking Frog Girl character, can get that validation from the show itself. Like, see, the creators and the other characters, they suck Sue's asshole too. Now I feel justified in jerking off to how much I love this character. I've pursued the comment sections of videos that react to these kind of episodes, and that's pretty much all there is. Just a bunch of, oh yeah, bro, don't sleep on my favorite fucking boy, bro. He's so fucking cool, bro. It's cringe. It's really fucking cringe. Like, there's no narrative value to these fights. The only one that means anything is the one with Deku, and that one has nothing to do with the fight itself. That they could have done the stupid vestiges shit no matter what was happening in the actual story. These fights only exist for the sake of fan service. The characters aren't really becoming stronger in ways that are necessary for some future task. They don't really need to win these fights for any reason, and almost all of it revolves around the characters that probably will continue to not matter for the majority of the story or anything important happening in the story. It's like the whole goddamn season is just this. Even if the story were to go in a direction in which the other characters actually matter in some way, we have no promise of that now in the narrative, and pretty much everyone except for Deku could have been cut entirely from the story by this point. I've kind of been all over the place without clear argumentative structure talking about this show, but there's another separate point entirely that I really want to make sure I include here. And it's something that applies to a lot of anime. Like, this is exactly the same case with, like, ReZero and Demon Slayer too, but it's an issue with over-dramatization. Of course, every person is going to have their own limits and personal definitions on how much dramatization they can take seriously. And I don't just mean dramatic story beats, obviously. I'm talking about, like, the shit that is clearly preying upon an emotional reaction in the audience, like trying to make the audience think something is tense or sad or impactful arbitrarily. Like the sad, obnoxious music, the constant screaming from characters, the stupid fucking dialogue where the characters are just, like, writing poetry in their head, talking about the fucking meaning of life and how epic and significant whatever they're doing is, or just shoving a million fucking flashbacks to vaguely dramatic shit characters have said in the past, because why the hell not? A lot of them have flashbacks to things that were stated literally minutes ago in the same fucking episode. Now, ideally, I actually prefer when this isn't a thing at all. I like a drama that makes me give a shit because it's well written and has engaging, believable dialogue and situations and characters. If there is something more dramatic at play, like some fucking musical number or striking imagery, I prefer when it's reflective rather than manipulative. Part of it is, of course, that fact that I prefer things that are more complex and nuanced and subtle than things that just slap you in the fucking face with their message and ideas. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Take, for example, okay, let's start at the very start of Shoto's match. And the bird guy walks up to him out of nowhere and says some overdramatic shit, like how they have this sworn sacred duty to uphold the values of the top two heroes or whatever, because they're both vaguely related to them, I guess. It's a real fucking stretch, what he's saying here. Now, this comes out of nowhere, okay? And it's about nothing. What are they doing? They're doing mock battles against the other class. There is literally no stakes to these fights. It doesn't matter if they win or lose. Hell, it's not even, like, educational. The characters aren't even learning much in these fights. A lot of the times if a character does something we've never seen them do, it's them telling the audience, oh, by the way, I've already learned this ability and now I'm just using it. So they're not actually learning anything from these fights, they're just showing off. So they're in a situation that essentially does not matter. Imagine if Tokoyami had this same fucking conversation with Shoto this morning at breakfast in the dorm. Like, he'd walk up to him all dramatic, look deeply into his eyes, and then say that as honorable heroes, they need to ensure that they eat a healthy and balanced breakfast. Of course, if that happened, it would probably come across as a joke, no doubt. But imagine if that scene was played completely straight and they expect you to take it seriously and be invested in their fucking made-up bullshit drama, because that is literally what is happening right here. This stupid excuse to pump drama into this scene could have been used under any circumstance, no matter how irrelevant or non-dramatic or pointless it is, and can be used in any circumstance in the future to pretend like something is more dramatic or important than it actually is. But that's not a perfect example either, because that's the place where forced drama is just silly if you consider the circumstances. Drama can be obnoxious and overblown in ways that it's impossible for me to take seriously and not roll my eyes at, even if the circumstances do technically warrant some level of drama from the characters themselves. It's a matter of one of those, like, most basic writing principles there is. Build up and payoff. If you want a payoff, you have to have build up first. I'm not going to give a fuck about some overdramatic horse shit without a lot of build-up. The more dramatically you present something, the more build-up I'll need ahead of time to actually become invested in that drama and taking it seriously. Shoto is a good example of this. Like, people like his fight with Deku in Season 2 because it had build-up into a payoff. But then, whenever they fucking feel like doing something with Shoto every now and then, now, instead of building up to another payoff, they just act like they didn't already blow their load and just have shitty flashbacks to the old build-up instead of making new build-up. You can't just make one build-up and then keep cashing in on it over and over and over. Like, take a generic and low-quality battle shonen like Fairy Tail, for example. Maybe you have some plot and adventures in the beginning of the show to build up the characters' relationships to one another in such a way that the audience can buy into it and have some small nugget of investment in the idea that these idiots are friends or whatever. And then you have some generic power of friendship moment where it capitalizes on those episodes of getting to that point. It's still generic and boring, but in theory it can function just like that if it's done right. But then the series just keeps fucking doing more and more power of friendship shit with the same characters, the same people, or bringing in even less developed characters, and then acting like they somehow have enough build-up to have these shitty fucking power of friendship payoffs. At a certain point, someone has to stop and think, the 80th time that you have a character screaming passionately out that these same fucking people are their best friends or whatever really doesn't have the same impact anymore. I don't care if your lives are in danger for the 80th time. It gets old, especially when it's only used to manipulate the audience in every other moment of the series. The characters don't even do anything or say anything that seems like they have this extreme close relationship. Like, of course, this is all also part of the issues of a series running a long time, or rather, the writer not being prepared for the length of a series and changing things as they go. See, the writing is clearly getting more and more used to the idea that he can just take fan service characters, slap together some really lazy references to past shit that he's already concluded, and pretend like something really important and substantial is happening, and call it a day. Lots of series that go on for a while start to get mainstreamed or streamlined in this way, where the creator doesn't want to put in the same amount of effort and work to build up shit towards a payoff. He just keeps doing more and more payoffs and acting like they're equally dramatic while referencing the same build-up. It's a really common occurrence. And hey, it usually works too, which is why it's so common. It works to the fan base. It's not good writing, it's bad writing. But anyways, when a series goes on for a while, some large portion of the fan base is just too blinded by their fanhood to see that the series objectively anymore. Like, they see characters they already like doing literally anything, and they'll tell themselves that it's just as good as the stuff that made them like the characters in the first place. Why do you think a shitload of people only complained about Game of Thrones Season 8 when it was already going rapidly downhill since Season 5? Because they're already dedicated fans, so they aren't really judging things anymore. It's also because most of them have shit taste and know next to nothing about good writing, but those are smaller factors. Me, all I really want is to not have my eyes rolling so hard that I develop vertigo. So if the show could dial back the intense overdramatic shit and spend a bit more time actually developing dramatic beats before treating them like something I should give half a fuck about, that'd be nice. I'm well aware that I have a much lower tolerance for overdramatic shit than the average viewer, but I'm not opposed to drama as a whole. Build up and payoff makes perfect sense, and people often get it twisted as to what counts as overdramatic. Like, if I see a character I've never met who, just lost his daughter, let's say, or whatever, I expect him to cry or be sad and whatnot. Him doing things on camera, even with the camera presenting them in a way that extenuates the pain or whatever it is, isn't necessarily overdramatic. It just communicates believable reactions and acts in a way that informs us, the viewers, as to what is going on with the characterization, to show us this reaction so that we can better understand the person we're being shown. There's a difference between presenting something for the sake of just keeping the audience in the loop and giving them more information, better way to understand the characters and their feelings, and being obnoxiously overdramatic and acting like relatively simplistic and underdeveloped drama is really fucking emotional all out of nowhere for the viewer. It's all about framing. And hey, like I said, being overdramatic isn't even necessary in the first place. Scenes don't have to be just drama batteries. You can make a scene that functions both as dramatic catharsis for the viewer and as a believable piece of character building. Like, take this scene.
You've always thrown everything you could at me. Well, I can take it, and now I can give it back! Come on! Strike me! You've never held back before!
This is a cathartic scene for the viewer. It is one of the payoffs after a long stretch of build-up and development in understanding, and most importantly, being able to believe that what the character is going through. You know, you trust the narrative to actually be accurate. You believe what the character is doing here because it has so much build-up. However, it's also an informative scene. It doesn't just exist to jerk itself off with how fucking emotional or powerful it is, like all these shitty anime scenes. I could watch this knowing nothing about Zuko and not feel like my intelligence is being insulted while watching it, because it seems like a completely natural scene that serves to tell me about his character, not just scream a bunch of completely generic shit in my ear and assume that I'm super invested. It's a scene that could only happen because of the intense feelings of the character. Like, Deku could punch some villain just because it's the right thing to do and not really get emotional at all. Or he could be writing these dumb fucking lines in his head about the true nature of being a hero and other generic shit while punching said villain. The action doesn't change. He's going to be punching the villain either way. But this scene of Zuko going up on the mountain is an action taken by him purely out of expression of his emotional state, not applying drama to a scene that could have easily existed without that drama, where the extra drama only serves to make the situation harder to take as seriously as the show wants me to take it. Now, Hiroaka has kind of fallen off the radar for a few years now, so I think that more and more people are becoming of this mindset that it's all just pretty mediocre as a series. But like I said, I have this weird kind of fixation with the series. There's like elements that appeal to me enough that I'd like to see them be used in a better series, or just like write the fucking show but be better about it, please. And that's how most popular media hooks large swathes of people, in all honesty. It has some clever gimmick or cool character design or just something that people latch onto as straightforwardly appealing, and then long term that investment only grows. It was nothing official, but Hiroaka is the one series that I have ever even put pen to paper to at least come up with a concept for a fanfiction version of it. Like, my idea of how I would take those elements to write something that I considered to be more interesting. I, of course, won't be talking about my version of the series because I still feel the emotion known as shame, but needless to say, I sure would like it if it were just a better series, or if it used its ideas and characters and established setting details in clever and interesting ways. I sure would like that. Anyways, that's all I've got for today. Most of what I've been watching recently is old hat shit to everything else, or to everyone else. I finally got around to watching Death Note after all this time. I've worked my way through shit like Better Call Saul, Re:Zero, and half a other dozen things at the time of this writing. The only thing that I finished recently besides last season's anime that was most recent was the most recent episode of Being a Dick, which none of you have heard of except for me, so I'll probably make a standalone video about that sometime down the line. Hope you found my thoughts compelling. I'll try to be more prolific with actually getting out content like this in the future. See you around.